es la cúspide de la Guerra Fría. En Nueva York, un misterioso hombre cae de la ventana de un hotel. En Kentucky, se lleva a cabo un experimento en el que se les da a los prisioneros LSD durante 2 meses y medio. En Montreal, un doctor le aplica cientos de descargas eléctricas a sus enfermos mentales. ¿Hasta dónde llegó la Agencia Central de Inteligencia para combatir la nueva amenaza comunista? ¿Armas bacteriológicas? ¿Lavado de cerebro? ¿Asesinatos? ¿Cuál es la verdadera historia detrás de los experimentos secretos de la CIA? Misterios de la historia. CIA, experimentos secretos. Manhattan, 1953, 2 a.m. Fin de semana del Día de Acción de Gracias. Hotel Statler, en la 7ª Avenida. Un hombre salta de la ventana de un 13º piso. El gerente, Armand Pastor, es el primero en llegar a la escena.
Salí apresuradamente y lo vi en el suelo, en medio de la calle. No creí que estuviera vivo, pero estaba mirándome, trataba de decirme algo. Tenía los ojos abiertos y una mirada muy seria. Yo le hablaba y trataba de entender lo que quería decirme.
¿Fue un suicidio o algo más siniestro? El hombre era Frank Olson, de 43 años, investigador de armas biológicas del ejército en Fort Detrick, Maryland. Pero pocos sabían que Frank Olson también trabajaba para la CIA. La muerte de Olson es solo una pieza del rompecabezas. Uno que habría horrorizado a la gente si lo hubiera sabido. A principios de la Primera Guerra Mundial, el gobierno de Estados Unidos realizó un gran número de experimentos secretos para ayudarles a ganar la Guerra Fría, exponiendo a algunos ciudadanos a agentes biológicos y químicos, desarrollando técnicas para controlar la mente y crear un candidato manchuriano, incluso planeando el asesinato de poderosos líderes tercermundistas. ¿Cuál es la magnitud de estos experimentos de lavado de cerebro? ¿Cómo se involucró la CIA en estos experimentos tan perturbadores? Día D. El final de la Segunda Guerra Mundial reveló la magnitud de las atrocidades nazis. En los campos de concentración se llevaban a cabo experimentos con la mente y con el cuerpo de los prisioneros.
En Dachau, los alemanes experimentaban con la hipnosis y con el uso de drogas en los interrogatorios para tratar de encontrar formas de controlar a la gente o hacer que actuara en contra de su voluntad.
Un intento para dominar el arte de controlar la mente. Muchos doctores nazis son llevados a juicio en Nuremberg por crímenes de guerra, pero no todos llegan a pisar las cortes. Algunos científicos son llevados encubierto a los Estados Unidos por la CIA bajo la operación Paperclip.
Algunos de ellos no podían obtener una visa sin la aprobación del Departamento de Estado porque eran criminales de guerra, así que Paperclip y otros proyectos eran operaciones encubiertas para brincarse los requisitos del Departamento de Estado e ingresarlos al país.
Estos científicos ponen manos a la obra de inmediato para contrarrestar la creciente amenaza de la Unión Soviética. En los años siguientes, la Guerra Fría se intensifica a un ritmo aterrador, con las superpotencias compitiendo por la supremacía militar y científica. El espionaje es el nombre del juego. La CIA comienza un programa multimillonario de investigación secreto sobre el uso de materiales biológicos y químicos, un término sutil para el uso de armas no convencionales. Bacterias para infectar al enemigo. veneno para asesinar, drogas para obtener la verdad en los interrogatorios. A la cabeza de estos experimentos está el Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, director de la secreta división de química de la CIA.
Fue un químico que desarrolló los métodos, los trucos del oficio, las cosas que usaban en las películas de James Bond, las que usaba Q.
Las misteriosas circunstancias de la muerte de Olson generaron muchas preguntas. Algunas respuestas se las llevó a la tumba junto con su vida secreta, trabajando con la CIA. La especialidad de Olson eran los sistemas de aerosoles, pero en 1953 su carrera ya había evolucionado. Hacía investigaciones secretas sobre armas biológicas y más.
En los años que trabajó para el gobierno, a él le preocupaba saber si estaba haciendo lo correcto.
En 1972, Sidney Gottlieb cierra la investigación sobre el control biológico y químico del comportamiento humano, debido ya a la poca relevancia de las operaciones clandestinas. Los norteamericanos ignoraban que alguna vez existió un programa de la CIA para controlar la mente. Pero el 11 de junio de 1975, el Washington Post publica que un científico civil a quien le dieron LSD sin que lo supiera, se arrojó de una ventana en un hotel de Manhattan. No se menciona ningún nombre, pero los Olson reconocen la historia de su padre, que había ocurrido 22 años atrás. Deciden hacerla pública. Frente a las principales cadenas de televisión, los Olson añaden el nombre de Frank Olson a la lista de víctimas de la CIA. La fuente del artículo sobre la muerte de Frank Olson es la Comisión Rockefeller, que surgió a raíz de Watergate. Es una investigación presidencial sobre las actividades de la CIA. Los Olson deciden demandar a la agencia por la muerte de su padre.
Su muerte fue el resultado de la negligencia e ilegalidad de la CIA a una gran escala.
A los 10 días estábamos en la Casa Blanca, escuchando las disculpas de Gerald Ford.
La familia recibe $750,000 por la muerte de Frank Olson. Alentados por los medios de comunicación, el Congreso lanza su propia investigación de la CIA, encabezada por el senador Frank Church. Sidney Gottlieb y Robert Lashbrook son llamados a testificar.
Se creía que era posible hacer muchas cosas con la hipnosis. Tuvimos un pequeño proyecto en el cual un hipnotista hacía algunos experimentos para ver cuáles eran las limitaciones de la hipnosis. Ver si era posible lograr que una persona hipnotizada hiciera algo que normalmente no haría.
Las revelaciones son sorprendentes. 80 instituciones fueron contratadas por la CIA para la investigación sobre el control de la mente, con un costo para los contribuyentes de $30 millones de hoy. El comité concluye que la agencia demostró su poco aprecio por las vidas humanas. El director de la CIA, Richard Helms, revela que en 1973 le instruyó a Gottlieb destruir los registros de los experimentos sobre el control de la mente. Pero algunos se salvaron de ser destruidos.
En las instituciones de gobierno nunca falta alguien que se quede con copias de documentos, como la descripción de los programas o las propuestas de los proyectos.
Entre los expedientes que dio a conocer la agencia, hay varios memorándums escritos luego de la muerte de Frank Olson. Los documentos describen el incidente de Deep Creek como un pequeño experimento, administrándole una pequeña dosis de LSD a todos los hombres en la reunión, menos a 2. Aparentemente ninguno reaccionó de manera anormal con la droga. Pero también hay un memorándum de un asesor de la CIA, Harold Abramson, que envió a Olson a la semana siguiente. De acuerdo con él, el experimento se realizó específicamente para atrapar a Frank Olson. Las contradicciones han atormentado a Olson durante años. Está convencido de que hay algo turbio en esto. En su afán por conseguir respuestas, finalmente acude al único hombre en el que sabe que puede confiar, su padre.
Cuando la excavadora comenzó a escarbar en junio de 1994, pensé que finalmente íbamos a abrir eso.
James Stars, experto en medicina forense, supervisa la exhumación.
El cuerpo estaba excepcionalmente en muy buenas condiciones.
Hay algo que es evidente.
No hay laceraciones en la cara o en la cabeza.
Esto no concuerda con el informe médico y con lo que se les dijo a los Olson. Había algo que la CIA no quería que la familia viera. Arriba del ojo izquierdo hay una enorme herida, pero en el informe médico no se menciona. Pero lo que tocó primero el suelo fueron los pies de Olson y luego cayó hacia atrás.
Es posible que alguien primero lo haya golpeado en la cabeza, impidiéndole defenderse, y luego lo haya arrojado por la ventana.
MKUltra was the secret CIA crash program to develop techniques to control the human mind. By the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,000 U.S. prisoners of war had signed confessions, 15% cooperated fully, and only 5% steadfastly refused confession or indoctrination. Professors Wolf and Hinkle submitted a secret report to Director of Central Intelligence Alan Dulles about communist methods of brainwashing that was the definitive work on the subject in 1953. It stated that no drugs or machines were used. Intense psychological pressure and human weakness were the key, beginning with solitary confinement. Guards constantly reminded the prisoner that he was totally cut off from outside support, ordered him to stand for long periods, dictated the positions allowed for sleep, waking him if he moved while sleeping, banned all outside stimuli such as books, conversation, or news of the outside world. After 4 to 6 weeks, the prisoner would break down. Quote, "He weeps, he mutters, and prays aloud in his cell." At this stage, the interrogation began in a special room. The guard told him that he knew his own crimes all too well. The prisoner is in the position of trying to prove his innocence to he knew not what. The interrogator and the prisoner bond in their shared ransacking of the captive's soul. As the interrogation proceeded, the prisoner realized that he could only end his ordeal with a full confession. Quote, "The prisoner feels that something must be done to end this. He must find a way out." According to a KGB man, more than 99% of prisoners sign a confession at this stage. Then the subject was either shot or sent to a labor camp after sentencing. Chinese techniques would move on to re-education of prisoners by moving them into a group cell for political indoctrination, incessant study of Marx and Mao, lectures and self-criticism led to political conversion by group pressure. Prisoners demonstrated their commitment by ferociously attacking any deviations. Constant intimacy with prisoners who reviled him for his resistance pushed the prisoner beyond his emotional endurance. As the prisoner conformed, his cellmates gave increased acceptance and esteem, which reinforced his commitment to the party, for he learned that only his acceptance allowed him to live successfully in the cell. In contrast, the American mind control effort was a mini Manhattan Project, with the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. The agency's brainwashing experts gravitated to people in the mold of the brilliant and sometimes mad scientists, obsessed by the wonders of the brain. In 1953, CIA officer Richard Helms chose Dr. Sidney Gottlieb to run the technical service staff. The TSS, through the Office of Research and Development, was given the job of developing poisons to assassinate political opponents, truth serum drugs for interrogating spies, and hypnotic techniques to create unwitting double agents, couriers, and robot assassins. Dr. Gottlieb used Nazi scientists and their state-of-the-art mind control techniques that had been perfected in concentration camps using victims of the Holocaust. General Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his personal approval to exploit the work and research of the Nazis in the death camps. The German doctors were brought to the U.S. and went to work for Project Paperclip. These men were insulated against war crimes charges. The Nuremberg prosecutors were shocked that the U.S. authorities were using German doctors despite their criminal past. Under the leadership of Dr. Strughold, 34 scientists accepted contracts from Project Paperclip and were moved to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. These personalities began to work on human radiation studies, aviation medicine, microwave technology, and MK-Ultra mind control experiments. The authorization to hire these Nazi scientists came directly from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The top military brass stated that they wished to exploit these rare minds. Operation Paperclip eventually recruited 9,000 Nazi scientists and technicians to help the U.S. destroy the USSR. Some of these scientists were known as programmers, people skilled in the art of breaking down and controlling the human mind. Dr. Ewan Cameron was president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations. He ran the Allen Memorial Institute, which was founded in 1943 with funds from the Rockefeller Foundation. Nazi paperclip scientists made their way into the CIA and military-sponsored mind control programs here in the United States and Canada. Some of these scientists were friends of Dr. Cameron. Money for Dr. Cameron's operation came from the CIA and was funneled through the Cornell Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. The systematic annihilation or depatterning of a subject's mind and memory was accomplished with overdoses of LSD, barbiturate sleep for 65 days at a stretch, and electroshock therapy at 75 times the recommended dosage. Psychic driving, the repetition of a recorded message for 24 hours a day, programmed the empty mind. The Canadian government settled a class action lawsuit by 250 former patients of Dr. Cameron decades later, but no person or institution has ever been disciplined or punished for these activities. Linda MacDonald was 25 years old in 1963 when Dr. Cameron treated her for mild postpartum depression. She received 102 electroshock therapy treatments, 80 days of drug-induced sleep, and emerged completely depatterned, essentially like a newborn, totally incontinent, unable to state her name or recognize her husband and children. She had to relearn how to drive, cook, read, and use a toilet. Eventually, unlike many of Dr. Cameron's patients, she made a fairly complete recovery. Dr. Cameron was the premier psychiatrist of the 20th century. He had studied Nazi scientists at the Nuremberg trials and later replicated many of their methods and sought their assistance in the race to control the human mind. Dr. Cameron's mind control experiments were one program out of many programs run by the CIA, Navy, Air Force, Army, and others. Although many parallel programs were occurring in the United States, none of them were ever discovered or prosecuted. These programs were run by Dr. Morse Allen, Dr. L. Wilson Green, Dr. Martin T. Orne, Dr. Stephen Aldrich, Dr. James Hamilton, and others. These American and foreign-born programmers were supervised by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was in turn supervised by Richard Helms and the director of the CIA, Allen Dulles. Gottlieb was a Machiavellian character who used paperclip scientists and would stop at nothing to win. He advocated low-intensity warfare, transmitting strategic subliminal messages to the brains of enemy populations, and the use of high frequencies to affect memory and the unconscious mind. In 1964, he wrote a memo to the Warren Commission where he mentions biological radio communication. Quote, cybernetics can be used in molding of a child's character, the inculcation of knowledge and techniques, the amassing of experience, the establishment of social behavior patterns, all functions which can be summarized as control of the growth processes of the individual. In 1953, MKUltra relied on LSD, but by the 1960s the emphasis had changed to biological radio communication. MKUltra had 149 sub-projects that encompassed nearly every aspect of human behavior and social science. In the 1977 Senate hearings, former CIA Director Admiral Stansfield Turner stated that the program took place at 80 institutions, including 44 universities, 15 private companies, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. MKUltra Subproject 119 was the foundation of all non-lethal weapons programs currently active and included a summary of 5 areas, one of which is entitled Techniques of Activation of the Human Organism by Remote Electronic Means. This memo was dated August 17, 1960, and when viewed with other evidence that was not destroyed, shows significant interest in radio frequency weapons and direct control of human behavior at a distance. By 1960, the CIA dropped emphasis on the use of LSD in favor of electronic influence. This aspect of the research is where the greatest modern emphasis has been, rather than chemical or biological agents, both of which violate existing treaties and leave physical traces. Dr. Stephen Aldrich took control of the Office of Research and Development in 1962 from Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Aldrich started Operation Often, an investigation into the occult with the help of Houston sorceress Sybil Leek. CIA behaviorists carefully studied every aspect of the occult underground. The Scientific Engineering Institute, SEI, was a CIA cutout that had been set up in 1956 to study radar. In 1962, SEI set up a lab to study the effects of electrodes deep in the brain. In 1972, SEI also sponsored a course at the University of South Carolina in rituals of demonology and voodoo. Dr. Aldrich was an MKUltra programmer who focused on remote brain manipulation and the occult, the twin threads that run through SEI Corporation. In 1962, a CIA manual focused on radiohypnotic intracerebral control, RHIC, which was developed by the Pentagon, quote, when a part of your brain receives a tiny electrical impulse from outside sources, such as vision, hearing, etc., an emotion is produced. Anger at the sight of a gang of boys beating an old woman, for example. The same emotions of anger can be created by artificial radio signals sent to your brain by a controller. You could instantly feel the same white-hot anger without any apparent reason, unquote. Another term, electronic dissolution of memory, EDOM, refers to the ability to erase memory at a distance. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, primarily run by the FBI as a covert action program against domestic dissidents.
the use of infiltration, psychological warfare, harassment through the legal system, and the use of extra-lethal force and violence, including murder, probably began in the 1950s and is now a permanent feature of U.S. government. Targets included the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, opposition political parties, and basically any progressive group in American society. The Senate and congressional hearings into the activities of the FBI and CIA were crushed. The Senate committee's report was edited by the agencies being investigated before its publication. The House committee's report, including an account of FBI and CIA obstruction of its inquiry, was suppressed altogether. Senator Church and Congressman Pike, the committee chairs, were both targeted in their re-election campaigns by the intelligence agencies and defeated, their careers destroyed. The Freedom of Information Act did open up access to FBI documents, and lawsuits forced the release of some COINTEL files to the media, but the most important files were withheld or destroyed, and former operatives report that the most heinous crimes were never committed to writing. William C. Sullivan, who ran the COINTEL program in the 1960s, was killed in a 1977 hunting accident shortly before giving testimony to a grand jury in 1977. The only two FBI officials who were ever prosecuted for COINTELPRO crimes were quickly pardoned by President Ford. There was an appearance of reform that was largely aimed at placating a weary public that had become disillusioned after Watergate. The most prominent target of COINTELPRO in the 1960s was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who received a blackmail letter from J. Edgar Hoover that detailed the existence of Dr. King's extramarital affairs and suggested he should suicide himself to preclude the release of the material to the press and its negative effect on his family and his movement. The surveillance of Dr. King included the 112th Military Intelligence Unit and even the use of U-2 spy planes to take photographs. Dr. King was marked, barely a month before his murder, for elimination as a potential messiah who could unify and electrify the black movement. The FBI planned to replace him, quote, in his role of the leadership of the Negro people, with conservative black lawyer Samuel Pierce, who was later named to Ronald Reagan's cabinet. The theme of forced suicide is repeated on others targeted by COINTELPRO. Jean Seberg was an actress involved in civil rights. Her husband received a forged letter from the FBI detailing a fictitious affair she was supposedly having with a black activist. The actress was pregnant at the time and attempted suicide, had a miscarriage, and eventually did commit suicide. Forced suicide on a COINTELPRO target allows intelligence agencies deniability for the crime. In effect, it is the perfect crime. A total of 2,300 officially approved COINTEL actions were admitted to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but thousands more have since been revealed. Ultimately, FBI documents disclose 6 major programs. FBI operatives were directed to disrupt meetings of targeted groups, spread rumors, inflame disagreements over what people normally fight over, money, politics, race, gender, sex, and to exacerbate rivalries and jealousy, to lead activists into unnecessary danger, and to set them up for false prosecutions. False news stories, forged documents, and anonymous letters and phone calls, as well as pressure on landlords and their employers, make up just some of the strategies used against activists. The major violence of the domestic terrorist campaign was directed at the black nationalist and American Indian movements. These individuals were readily imprisoned on false charges or assassinated. British Commander Frank Kitson first codified counterinsurgency operations theory in his book Low-Intensity Operations, Subversion, Insurgency, and Peacekeeping, and he insists that infiltration and psychological operations be mounted against dissident groups in normal times before any mass movement can develop. These tactics were adopted into COINTELPRO against American citizens in peacetime, with considerable energy spent ensuring that the different progressive groups did not link up and cooperate, specifically the anti-war movement, composed of suburban white youth, and the black nationalist movement. There was also a major effort to preclude African American leaders from linking up with leaders in Africa. Infiltration of the KKK by the FBI reached 10 to 20% of its membership at the height of the civil rights struggle, and these assets, along with neo-Nazi party members, were used to attack civil rights workers and activists. COINTEL operations are presently being incorporated into the development of microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. Dissidents that in the past were visibly attacked or assassinated in a traditional manner are now targeted for elimination using electromagnetic weapons. These internal dissidents are used as human guinea pigs and experimental subjects in terminal experiments that are designed to force a suicide, incarceration, or premature death due to the effects of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. These political assassinations are accomplished with invisible bullets that leave no obvious injuries. The driving of a target to suicide using microwave hearing as well as other techniques is perfectly deniable because these individuals are tormented invisibly, unable to seek help from the psychiatric community due to the symptoms of the attacks mimicking symptoms of schizophrenia that naturally affect several million Americans. Thus, the intelligence agencies have achieved perfect deniability for their crimes. The Golden Triangle. In China in 1949, the Communists under Mao Zedong drove out the U.S.-backed nationalist warlord Chiang Kai-shek with his defeated army, the KMT, the Kuomintang. They fled to the Golden Triangle and to Taiwan. Within the Golden Triangle, they took over opium production to finance weapons purchases and the finer things in life. By the 1950s, heroin had become a nationwide concern in the United States. From Senate hearings to popular movies, criminologists blamed addicts for soaring crime rates. These KMT operations were hidden from the U.S. public for 30 years, and it is only recently Afghanistan has captured 90% of the world heroin market. The U.S. exploited the Hmong and Montagnard tribesmen as a source of opium and used the CIA's Air America to bring in guns and supplies in exchange for drugs. Large quantities of heroin appeared in the United States, much of it smuggled inside the bodies of dead American GIs. Addiction plagued the Army in Vietnam to the point of reducing their fighting capacity, and after the war these men brought their drug problem home with them. The U.S. government promoted the drug traffic and intervened to make sure traffic would not be discovered. In the words of one former investigator, quote, "You'd be running a criminal investigation, say narcotics. You'd find out that Inspector so-and-so of your national police is involved in this. You investigate up to a point and you can't go any further. It would go to our headquarters and then it would go to Washington and nothing would ever happen. The intelligence gleaned from these people was more important than stopping the drug traffic." The senior public relations man for the DEA offers the explanation, quote, "Their mission was to get people to fight against the communists, not to stop the drug traffic." Iran-Contra. A secret program by the Reagan administration circumvented Congress and illegally sold weapons to Iran, a terrorist nation, in order to pay for a guerrilla war against the Sandinista Nicaraguan government. When the operation was uncovered, it also uncovered an off-the-books operation that, in the words of Senator Daniel Inouye, was a secret government with its own permanent funding mechanism and its own Army, Navy, and Air Force. The exposure of the Iran-Contra operation revealed the tip of the iceberg. Admiral Richard Secord ran a many-faceted program that concentrated on banking fraud, drug smuggling, and illegal arms dealing by officers and former officers of the U.S. military. Oliver L. North, a Marine lieutenant colonel, was assigned to the National Security Council staff beginning in 1981 until he was fired in 1986. North was the White House official most directly involved in secretly aiding the Contras, selling arms to Iran and diverting Iran arms sales proceeds to the Contras. North was Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs and reported to his superior National Security Advisor, Robert C. McFarland, and later, John M. Poindexter. He claimed to have taken much of his direction from Central Intelligence Agency Director William Casey. North testified repeatedly that he believed President Reagan was aware and approving of his activities. North was indicted in 1988 on 16 Iran-Contra charges. He was found guilty on 3 counts. His convictions were vacated in 1990 when an appeals court found that witnesses in his trial were prejudiced by his immunized congressional testimony. Many figures that came under criminal investigation and prosecution in Iran-Contra, like John Poindexter, Elliot Abrams, Richard Armitage, Dick Cheney, Otto Reich, Colin Powell, and John Negroponte, returned to serve in both Bush administrations without serious challenge from Congress. The Contras and the Crips. A San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles, funneled millions in profits directly to the Contra guerrillas, run by the Central Intelligence Agency. This drug network opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, a city now known as the crack capital of the world. Gary Webb broke the story that no other major newspaper would run, and was found murdered in what can only be described as a staged suicide.
We had Contra pilots flying out of Ilopango, smuggling drugs into the U.S., cocaine specifically.
For America, bound from military airfields in Florida and Texas, offloaded out of sight of the law, then shipped to California and other points in the U.S.
Point blank, stay away from it. It's a covert operation being run by the White House.
The highest councils of our government, in the White House and in the Justice Department. There is no question of that. I can document that.
Turns up wrongdoing. If it turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
De averiguarlo.
Todo lo que nos rodea en el medio ambiente con una corriente eléctrica tiene un flujo magnético a su alrededor que emite ondas de frecuencia electromagnética EMF. La estimulación cerebral ha estado en proceso de desarrollo desde el programa MACULTRA de control mental de principios de los años 50, que incluyó la investigación neurológica en radiación y la investigación y el desarrollo bioeléctrico. El mapeo cerebral, generado por ordenadores de NSA, la agencia de espionaje más grande de Estados Unidos, puede monitorear continuamente toda la actividad eléctrica en el cerebro de manera continua. La NSA graba los resultados de descifrar mapas cerebrales de cientos de miles de personas con fines de seguridad nacional. IMF, estimulación cerebral, también se utiliza en secreto por los militares para el enlace cerebro a computadoras, como por ejemplo en los aviones de combate militar. Para los propósitos de vigilancia electrónica, la actividad eléctrica en el cerebro relacionada con el habla puede ser traducida en pensamientos verbales del sujeto. RNM puede enviar señales codificadas a la corteza auditiva del cerebro, permitiendo así la comunicación del audio directa al cerebro sin pasar por los oídos. Agentes de la NSA pueden usar esto para debilitar de manera encubierta a las personas mediante la simulación de las alucinaciones auditivas características de la esquizofrenia paranoide. Sin ningún tipo de contacto con el ser humano, la vigilancia remota neuronal puede mapear la actividad eléctrica de la corteza visual del cerebro de una persona y mostrar imágenes del cerebro en un monitor de vídeo. Magnus, ¿la Unión Europea es consciente de lo que me estás contando o forma parte de esa farsa?
Bueno, ellos son parte de esto, claro.